I was 8 the first time I heard it said out loud, not whispered behind doors or muttered in exhausted sighs, but spoken clearly, firmly, like a label being glued onto my skin. She's the difficult one. My mother didn't even lower her voice. It wasn't meant to hurt me, it was meant to define me. And somehow, that made it worse. From that moment on, everything I did passed through that filter. If I asked questions, I was argumentative. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I stayed quiet, I was sulking. There was no version of me that wasn't difficult. At first, I tried to fight it. I remember making little promises to myself at night, lying under a blanket that felt heavier than it should have. Tomorrow, I'll be easier. I'll smile more. I'll say yes more. I'll stop asking why. But children don't become different people overnight, no matter how desperately they want to. And every time I failed to meet their invisible standard, I could see the disappointment settle deeper into their eyes, like confirmation of something they already believed. My older brother, Daniel, was the opposite. Calm, agreeable, the golden example. Why can't you be more like him? Became the background noise of my childhood. He never argued, never pushed back. But what no one noticed, or maybe no one cared to notice, was that Daniel didn't ask for anything either. He had learned early that silence was safer. I hadn't learned that yet. Not at 8, not at 10, not even at 12. By the time I turned 14, I had stopped trying to prove them wrong. Labels, I realized, are heavy things. If you carry them long enough, they start to shape your posture. I became quieter, but not in the way they wanted. My silence wasn't obedience, it was distance. I stopped sharing things about my day. I stopped telling them about school, about the things I loved, about the things that scared me. It didn't seem to matter anyway. In their eyes, I was still the difficult one. Always would be. But there were things I didn't stop doing. I didn't stop noticing. I didn't stop remembering. It started small. A comment here, a contradiction there. My mother would say we couldn't afford something, then come home the next day with a new handbag. My father would insist on rules that only seemed to apply to me. Curfews that Daniel didn't have. Punishments that felt selective. At first, I thought it was just unfairness, the ordinary kind that exists in most families. But as I got older, the inconsistencies became harder to ignore. When I was 16, I found the first piece of it. I wasn't looking. The cabinet was crammed with years of forgotten things, school papers, receipts, faded envelopes. I was halfway through pulling out a stack when a thin folder slipped loose and fell to the floor. Pale blue, slightly bent at the corners, like it had been handled often once and then abandoned. I almost didn't open it. There's a strange instinct we have, even as teenagers, to avoid things that feel important. Like we sense that opening them will change something we're not ready to face. But curiosity has always been stronger than my fear. Maybe that's why I was difficult. Inside were documents, official looking, typed, stamped. At first glance, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Names, dates, signatures, and then I saw mine. Not just my name, but a version of it I had never seen before. Different middle name, different formatting, like it belonged in a different story. My heart started beating faster, not in panic but in recognition of something just out of reach. I flipped through the pages more carefully this time. Birth records, legal forms, and then, tucked in the back, a letter. Handwritten. I remember sitting on the floor, the cabinet still open, dust clinging to my jeans, as I read it. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but every word felt like it was rearranging the ground beneath me. The letter was addressed to my parents. Not from a stranger, from someone who knew them. Someone who knew me. I didn't understand all of it, not right away. But I understood enough to feel something shift inside me, something that had been rigid for years suddenly loosening. For the first time, the label didn't feel like truth. It felt like a cover. I put the folder back exactly where I had found it. Closed the cabinet, walked away like nothing had happened. Because even at 16, I knew something important. You don't confront a story until you understand all of its pieces. And that folder, that was just the beginning. For the next 2 years, I watched more carefully than I ever had before. I paid attention to the way my parents spoke to me versus Daniel. The way certain topics made them tense. The way my mother avoided answering direct questions about my early childhood. I started asking differently, not directly, but sideways. Casual questions disguised as curiosity. Was I a quiet baby? Did I look like you when I was born? Simple things, harmless things, but their answers were never simple, never consistent, and slowly, piece by piece, I built a picture. Not a complete one, but enough to know that something fundamental had been hidden from me. Something that explained why I had always felt slightly out of place in my own life. By the time I turned 18, I knew where to look. The folder in the cabinet wasn't the only one. There were others, and I was done being the girl who accepted labels without question. I was ready to open every single one of them. The second folder wasn't hidden. That's what made it almost laughable. It sat in plain sight, tucked between old tax documents in my father's office drawer, labeled so blandly it practically begged to be ignored. Records. Nothing more, nothing less. But by then, I had learned that the most important truths are often disguised as the most ordinary things. My hands didn't shake when I opened it. Not anymore. Whatever fear I once had been replaced by something sharper, clarity, maybe. Or determination. I wasn't the 8-year-old girl trying to earn softness anymore. I was 18, and I was done asking for permission to understand my own life. Inside, everything connected. Legal correspondence. Dates that lined up too neatly with gaps in my childhood memories. Signatures that matched the ones in the blue folder. And then, the final piece, a document that didn't just suggest the truth. It stated it. Adoption papers. Not recent, not something that had been openly discussed and processed with care. These were old, filed quietly, finalized without celebration, without acknowledgement, without me ever being told. I sat there longer than I expected to. Not crying, not angry, just still, because suddenly, every moment of my childhood rearranged itself into something that made a terrible kind of sense. The distance, the labels, the way love had always felt conditional, like I was being measured against a standard I didn't understand. I hadn't been failing to belong. I had never been given the chance to. And Daniel, he wasn't just the easy one. He was their biological son. The one who fit without effort. The one who didn't raise uncomfortable questions just by existing. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel difficult. I felt miscast. The laughter I had grown up hearing, the subtle kind, the kind that comes after a sigh or a shared glance, it echoed differently in my mind now. It wasn't about me being too much. It was about them not knowing what to do with something they hadn't fully chosen to understand. But the most powerful realization wasn't about them. It was about me, because that label, the one they had placed on me at 8, only held power as long as I believed it. And sitting there, surrounded by papers that proved how much of my story had been kept from me, I realized something simple and undeniable. I had never been the problem. I closed the folder carefully, not out of respect for them, but out of respect for myself. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't drama. This was information, truth, and truth doesn't need to be shouted to be powerful. That night, I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I did something I had never done before. I packed a small bag. Not to run away, but to create space. Because I understood something now that I hadn't understood as a child. You can't demand honesty from people who benefit from your confusion. The next morning, I left a note. It wasn't long. It didn't accuse. It didn't beg. It simply said, I know. And for the first time in my life, those 2 words didn't feel like defiance. They felt like freedom. I stayed with a friend for 3 days. Long enough for the silence to stretch. Long enough for them to realize that whatever version of me they thought they understood was gone. When I finally returned, the house felt different. Quieter. Not tense. Just aware. They were waiting. Both of them. Sitting at the kitchen table like they had rehearsed this moment 100 times and still didn't know where to begin. You found it, my mother said. Not a question. I nodded. There was no anger in me when I spoke. That surprised them more than anything else. Why didn't you tell me? It was a simple question. But it carried 18 years of weight. Their answers came slowly, hesitantly, pieces of a story that, for once, they didn't try to control completely. Fear, uncertainty, a belief that telling me would make things harder. That I was already sensitive, already difficult, and that this truth would break something in me. I almost smiled at that. Because the truth hadn't broken me. It had explained me. You didn't make me difficult, I said quietly. You made me confused. Silence followed. Not defensive, not dismissive, just silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. For the first time, they weren't looking at me like a problem to manage. They were looking at me like a person they didn't fully know. And strangely, that was enough. I didn't forgive everything that day. Healing doesn't work like that. But I did something more important. I stopped carrying a label that was never mine to begin with. The folder hadn't just revealed a secret. It had given me back my voice. And this time, when I used it, no one laughed.